Hey everybody, today I want to talk about an album by Derek and the Dominos called Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. This is an album that I just listed to my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com, and this is an album I've been after for a very, very long time. I don't know if you remember, but about maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I made a video talking about how I was trying to get my hands on the best sounding pressing of Layla I could possibly find. And I was just striking out left and right. I was getting a lot of early UK pressings of the album. I got a German pressing of the album. I got a bunch of US pressings of the album on the Yellow Atco label, some later on the RSO label, some later Polydor, and all of them just sounded flat to me and thin and just lacking a lot of body. It was just it got to be a little bit of a frustrating situation. And I kept doing research, trying to find online what people were saying, what they thought was the best sounding pressing. And there were so many different opinions on there. It was really hard to figure out. Well, I finally found the pressing of this album. And I actually had to go through 3 different copies of the same pressing to hit upon this one. This one is a dynamic, amazing pressing of Layla. This is Layla as you've never ever heard it before. It is so wonderful. It's got a full body to it. It's got so much bass. By the way, this pressing makes it seem like all the other pressings. I will show you a couple other ones over here. It makes it seem like the other pressings just didn't have bass ever. It's hard to believe, but this is so excellent and wonderful. Now, I have to say that this is one of the albums that's always been one of my favorite albums of all time, and it has a lot of personal connections for me because this is an album that my parents played constantly. My dad just obsessed over this album. He would play it all the time. It was one of the early albums that I loved that wasn't a Beatles album because I was still am, by the way, just an obsessive Beatles fan. And so when I was younger, I just wanted to listen to the Beatles all the time. Not much has changed, by the way. But when I was younger, I really would only want to listen to the Beatles. In fact, like my parents would try to play me Beach Boys, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the Beach Boys. But this is one of the albums that they would play that I actually liked a lot. And I would ask all the time, who are Derek and the Dominos? I had no clue that this involved Eric Clapton or Duane Allman or anybody like that. I just knew I liked the music. So this is an album that I've always just cherished so much. And then when I met my wife, we both really connected on Derek and the Dominos. There were 2 albums we connected on, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys and this album by Derek and the Dominos. We just both love it so much. So let's talk a little bit about a back history here when it comes to Derek and the Dominos. So Derek and the Dominos, if you don't know, the band consists of Eric Clapton, who plays obviously guitar, and he wrote almost all the songs, and he sings on almost all the songs as well. Eric Clapton, along with Duane Allman from the Allman Brothers, and Duane plays a lot of slide guitar parts on this album, and I will talk about how he ended up coming into this whole project in a little bit here. So you got Eric Clapton, Duane Allman, arguably 2 of the best guitar players of all time. Definitely some of the best guitar players of the late 60s, early 70s. And then you had Bobby Whitlock, who plays organ and piano, and he sings, and he's amazing as well. You have Jim Gordon on drums, who is like a session drummer who actually played on Pet Sounds a little bit, and just played on a bunch of stuff. And then you got Carl Rattle, who was the bass player. And Carl Rattle originally was in the band Gary Lewis and the Playboys, and then he went on to be a session player as well. So you have this amazing band, and the way they kind of all got together is they all were playing with Delaney and Bonnie. And Delaney and Bonnie, for those of you who don't know, Delaney and Bonnie were this American husband and wife musical act. And they caught the attention of Eric Clapton, and Eric Clapton joined their band after he had worked with Blind Faith. He was looking for something else to do and actually ended up playing with Delaney and Bonnie. He went on a tour with them, And then he ended up recruiting George Harrison to play with them as well. And at the time, the band consisted of Jim Gordon on drums, and Bobby Whitlock was in the band, and Carl Rattle was in the band. So that's how Eric Clapton met these guys that eventually would be in Derek and the Dominos with him. So then they went on this tour with Delaney and Bonnie, and then after that, they ended up all playing on George Harrison's album, All Things Must Pass. So really, you couldn't ask for a better, I don't know what you call it, like a rehearsal period or just a getting to know you period for a group of musicians. Touring with Delaney and Bonnie and then recording George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. I mean, that's a really great way to become tight as a band. So after they worked on All Things Must Pass, they then flew back to the States and decided to make a record of their own as this band, Derek and the Dominos. So they recorded in Miami, and they got Tom Dowd to produce the sessions. Now, Tom Dowd at the time was working with the Allman Brothers. He was recording their second album, and he got a phone call from somebody saying that Eric Clapton and his new band were going to be recording in Miami, and he wanted Tom Dowd to be the producer. And Tom Dowd then told the Allman Brothers, well, I got to go to Miami. And Duane Allman said, well, I would love to just go to the sessions and say hi to Eric Clapton and just watch what's going on. So please let me know when that's happening. And so, long story short, when Tom Dowd met Eric Clapton and Derek and the Dominos in Miami, Duane Allman came along and went to the sessions, and Eric Clapton immediately said, please play, and he started playing on the sessions. Now I am missing, there's a little bit more of the story. Actually, Eric Clapton found out that the Allman Brothers were playing in Florida, in Miami, and so he went to the show with Tom Dowd, saw them play, and that's when he invited Duane to come to the studio and basically participate in the sessions. And Duane Allman, by the way, did do that. So Duane Allman is all over this album, and he is, besides being one of the best guitar players probably to ever play, he is just so tasty on this album. The guitar parts he adds to this are so beautiful. They work so perfectly with Eric Clapton's parts. Sometimes when you get two major players on either a live show or an album, it can be a little bit too much, like there's just too much going on. But Eric Clapton and Duane Allman, they really they knew exactly what to play in exactly the right moments and made this album spectacular. If you're a guitar player or if you're a fan of the art of guitar soloing, guitar playing, this is just one of the best albums for someone like you if you're into that. And I definitely am into that. So this is an album that I've studied over and over and over again just because of the guitar playing alone. So right there, that's phenomenal. Now, another subject needs to be brought up about this album. So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, Eric Clapton ended up marrying George Harrison's first wife, Pattie Boyd. And the way this happened is Eric Clapton met Pattie. Well, Eric Clapton and George Harrison were really close friends in the 60s. And so Eric Clapton would socialize with George Harrison and his wife, Pattie Boyd. And by the late 60s, early 70s, Eric Clapton had just fallen in love with Pattie Boyd. And granted, at the time, Pattie Boyd and George Harrison were kind of going through a rough patch in their marriage as well. So there was a lot of stuff going on there that kind of left the door open for Eric Clapton to kind of move in. But at some point before the recording of this album, Eric Clapton did confess his love to Pattie Boyd, and she basically told him, it's not going to happen. I love George. I'm with George. And so Eric was turned away, and he put all his pain and emotion into this album in kind of an attempt to get her attention and kind of prove that he cared about her and loved her and wanted to be with her. And so that's really the basis for this album, is that Eric Clapton is just pouring his heart and his soul into his playing, into his songwriting, into his singing, into this album. And this album, in my opinion, Eric Clapton never again had that kind of fire in his playing and in his singing and in his songwriting that he had on this album. After this album, he went into intense heroin addiction, and during the album too, by the way, but heroin addiction, just substance abuse, just he went on a downward spiral. Granted, about I think two years or maybe even less than that after this album's released, he did end up getting together with Patty Boyd, and they got married, and they were together for I think at least 10 years or something like that. So anyway, a lot of drama involved in the making, the behind the kind of the history of this album. But back to the music and back to this pressing. So this album has a ton of just classic songs on it. The most famous, of course, being Layla, and it sounds phenomenal on this pressing. It is so dynamic and so much bass, and it's one of those recordings that you can actually see into the recording. You can see the depth of the instruments. You can see there are the drums. There's Dwayne Allman's slide guitar. There's Eric's guitar. You can really see the space around all the instruments, which is an amazing listening experience to partake in. It's just brilliant. And I gotta say, all the players on this album are just so great. Jim Gordon is an amazing drummer. Carl Rattle, fantastic bass player. He actually went on to play with Eric Clapton on almost all of his solo albums of the 1970s. Bobby Whitlock is the unsung hero on this album. Bobby Whitlock sings harmonies with Eric Clapton. He actually also sings lead on a couple songs. He wrote a couple songs on here. Plays amazing organ and piano, and I think some guitar as well, actually too, some acoustic guitar. Just an amazing musician as well. So it's just full of fantastic players at their peak, and recorded in an amazing way by Tom Dowd. Tom Dowd is a legendary engineer and producer. So it's just this album's just the best of the best, really. Now let's talk about this pressing. So what is so magical about this pressing? Well, this is an original, or actually this is a pressing from the early 70s, and it's on the Polydor label. Now it's on the red Polydor label. And this record is in beautiful, 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 beautiful condition. And there's side 2. Now, the thing that's special about this is it has Sterling in the dead wax stamped on all 4 sides of this is a double album, by the way, on all 4 sides of these records. Sterling is stamped. Now, that is something that doesn't exist on the other pressings I heard, except there is a Sterling stamp on one of the later, I think it's RSO labels, where it's like a silver label. But those don't sound that good, so it's kind of confusing as to why these do sound so great and the other ones don't sound as good. But this pressing is unbelievable. It is night and day compared to all of the other pressings, and I will show you a couple of the ones that I still have here from the batch that I worked with to try to find this one. Now, I don't really understand why this is so much better than all the other ones, but of all the records I've ever worked on now for my website and tried, or just even before when I was trying to find good records for my own collection, this album, Layla and Other Sort of Love Songs, is the one that was the most difficult. And when I found the one that was the one, it was so obvious and so it just stuck out like, wow, that's the one, that it was almost like, how is this possible? How can these other pressings be so bad and this one can be so great? And I really don't have an explanation for that. All I know is this is the one. It's a beautiful, beautiful sounding pressing. If you are trying to get your hands on the best sounding version of Layla, this is it, folks. So head on over to my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com, and pick this one up, because this is awesome. I don't know when I will find another one like this. Another thing I should mention is that I had 2 other copies of this exact pressing with the Sterling, with the red Polydor label. And they were very, very noisy. And I don't know if it's the vinyl that it was pressed on or what, because they all looked very clean, but they were way too noisy to sell to anybody. The sound was good, but they were just, the surface noise was too much. That being said, I listed this one on the website as near mint excellent. So near mint / excellent, because in some parts of this, there is a little bit of surface noise. It's not bad at all. In fact, it's phenomenal compared to all the other pressings I've heard of this album. I don't know why there is a little bit of surface noise. I kind of suspect that the actual master tape might have a little bit of a hiss going on, that kind of almost presents itself like it might be surface noise, but I don't think it actually is surface noise, because these records are about as clean and as near mint as you can get. When you look at them under a light, they look absolutely perfect, and they sound amazing. But I do note on the website that there is a slight bit of surface noise, and so that's why it gets a near mint / excellent rating. So I just wanted to make that clear here on this video of the album. Now let's talk about some of these other pressings. So this is a early pressing on the Atco label, on the yellow Atco label. Now this is the second best pressing that I found of this album, and it's second best, but it's way down. So like, this is the one on the website is the best one, and that's up here. The second best one is way down here. So there's a big gap between number 1 and number 2. But this is the second best sounding pressing. If this is the one that you owned and had in your collection, it would be fine. It's an okay sounding record. When I say okay, I mean like it's, I'm trying to compare what this compares to. It's kind of along the lines of like a Capitol pressing of, like a rainbow Capitol pressing of like a Beach Boys album. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with those, but those are like, obviously the music is amazing, but the actual pressing isn't that great. It's a little thin sounding, and it's just kind of you know? And that's what this yellow Atco pressing is for me. And I went through a lot of these, and they're all very consistent. They all have a very similar sound to them. But yeah, if you find some of these in your local record shop and you can get it for like $10 or under, it's worth picking up for sure. But in no way does it compare to the red Polydor pressing at all. And by the way, I should mention this red Polydor pressing is a US pressing. I did listen to some UK pressings, and they were a bit of a mess as well. And I suspect they had like second or third or fourth generation master tapes to work with, so that's kind of odd. Not kind of odd, but that explains why they maybe don't sound that great. Okay, this is another one. This is the RSO label one, and this one has up here it says contains 2 records. This one now is a very poor sounding pressing. This is on the RSO Tan label, and you can see that right there. Very poor. Much worse, in my opinion, than even the yellow Atco label. This one, if you found it in a store, I actually wouldn't even recommend picking it up, because it's just it's lacking a lot, and it sounds like it's like it was taken from like a third or fourth generation tape again. So it's just very distant sounding, not really present at all. So, and then of course there are tons of other pressings of this album. I listened to some of the remastered album that I had, a digital version of it, and while that sounds pretty good, it seems a little inauthentic, like a lot of those digital remasters can sound. This is an album, in my opinion, that you just have to listen to on vinyl, because it was made for to be listened to on vinyl, recorded obviously to tape. And it's just a very dynamic record that unfortunately has a lot of really poor sounding pressings out there. But this one on the website is not one of those. And I hope you will head to the website and pick this one up, because whoever gets this will really enjoy it. So that is my video for Derek and the Dominos, Layla, and other assorted love songs. So head over to the website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. Pick this one up, and hey, stay tuned for some more videos and some more records. And until then, bye for now.